You're already good enough. You always been good enough. You always will be good enough. But what can happen, which happens for a lot of us, is we forget that we're good enough because we had experiences of not being good enough. Maybe you had experience of not being good enough for your parents. Maybe you had experience of not being good enough for that person who decided to leave you in that relationship. Maybe you had experience of not being good enough for those jobs you went for. Maybe you had experiences for not being good enough for that person that you wanted to become a client. Maybe you had experiences of not being good enough for the people that you wanted to actually be friends with, actually wanted them to accept you. It goes on and on and on. Even in the midst of all those experiences, you're still good enough. You are good enough simply because you exist. This magnificent creator that created each and every one of us created you to exist in this present moment because you're good enough. But then also, you can be good enough for yourself. You be good enough for yourself in the midst of having those experiences of not being good enough, because those are just experiences of not being good enough, but it doesn't have to mean that moving forward that you're not good enough. Just not good enough for those moments. Add those moments as well. And I realize, and I want for you to realize as well, if you're willing to, you're good enough simply because you exist. But you can be good enough for you, even in the midst of not being good enough for all those situations. If you're willing to do that, just say, even though I went through all those experiences of not being good enough, I'm still good enough simply because I exist. And I can be good enough for me because I am good enough for me as I am right now. Now, just imagine that type of space now, instead of trying to prove that you're good enough, trying to prove to yourself you're good enough. You just remember that you've always been good enough. And now you go for those things in your life from a place of already being good enough, as opposed to going for those things to become good enough. I love you infinitely, Soul Fam. You're infinitely good enough simply because you exist. If you came across this video, this is a lovely reminder for you to take in. Take it in. Stay connected.